Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second annual Methoda conference. Our first session will be in English, but the rest of the day will be in Hebrew, so stay calm. Since October 7th, we have all been doing our best to keep life in Israel as normal as possible. Each and every one of us worries and prays for the safe return of all hostages and for the health of our soldiers and their families. We need to stay strong and optimistic. And what could be more optimistic than education? Education in general, and specifically gifted education. I would like to thank our keynote speaker, Professor רינה סבוטניק, from Berkeley University, for being such an optimistic person and for honoring us with her presence. It is a huge privilege to have Professor Sbotnik as keynote speaker at this conference. I would also like to thank the advisory board of this conference, Dr. Janet Aviad, Dr. Rachel Zorman, Dr. Inbal Shani, Dr. Golan Lahat, and Dalia Kasovich. This conference is a collaboration between the Future Scientist Center and Israel's Ministry of Education. I am happy to invite Mr. Menachem Nadler, Head of the Division for Gifted and Outstanding Children at the Ministry of Education, to speak. Menachem, please.
Boker Tov, good morning. It's good they let me talk before Eli because of his perfect English. But I'll do my best. Dear guests, good morning and welcome. It is an honor for me to open the second Methoda conference for research in the field of gifted education, held by the Future Scientist Center and the Division for Gifted and Outstanding Students in the Ministry of Education. It is an honor for all of us to host Professor רינה סבוטניק as our keynote speaker. רינה is the General Director of the Center in Psychology and Education at the American Psychology Association. And I will leave the next speaker to introduce רינה and her important research and achievement in this field. Also join us today, Mr. Yaron Mariav, the Chairman of the Future Scientist Center, Mr. Eli Fried, the CEO of the Future Scientist Center and the Center program leaders and staff, Orni, Tomer, Dalia, Dr. Rachel Zorman, Janet Aviad, Daniel, and others. We also invite Mrs. Shlomit Rachmal, who served as the head of our division for 17 years and had the honor to replace her in this role. Avishag Idan, Dalia Kasovich, and Ada Drori, our national supervisor, and the academic researchers, county coordinators, national, regional, and school instructors, principals, teachers, leaders of the Future Scientist programs in the academic institution, and all distinguished guests. The Methoda conference aims to emphasize the importance of research in the field of gifted education, to learn and to share about new development in this field. Research served as an important tool by helping us to shape policies and decision-making that impacts the nurturing practices for gifted, excellent, and outstanding students in Israel. Our division is responsible for identifying and nurturing the top 20% of Israel students, including gifted and excellent students, alongside with students defined as excellence by their schools or according to their community levels. We aim to provide cognitive, emotional, and social response to these students in all education systems they belong to, in homogeneous groups and inside the heterogeneous classroom. To do so, we operate a wide range of learning frameworks, dedicated programs and learning materials, instructional and guidance resources. As part of our responsibility to establish policy, to budget the activities, and carry out evaluation actions, we frequently ask ourselves 3 questions. First one, how can we expand the circle of belonging and impact of these students as part of their nurturing program in order to see this population as a serving elite in the future? The long-standing professional partnership between our division and the Future Scientist Center is one example of it. The second one is how do we instill the approach of providing a response to gifted and outstanding students throughout the entire educational system, from the level of students, teachers, principals, supervisor, leading them to adopt culture of excellence. And the third one is how does current research, rapid changes in technology, volatility and uncertainty help us to be more precise, innovative, and make better tailored suits program to our target population. Another but no less important goal of this conference is to encourage more research in the field of giftedness, in emotional and academic issues, gender issues, periphery via center aspects, and more. We look for more master works in this field, more PhDs, postdoctorates, publication. We are ready to collaborate with any researchers that think about questions that interest us all, and helping you with access to data and to our educational field. I would like to thank the conference organizer, especially Dr. Shira Hirsch, who leads the Alumni Network and Methoda program, Mrs. Dalia Kasovich, our National Supervisor for Gifted, that worked together with Shira to plan this unique event. Special thanks to Professor Chava Widergur from Gordon Academic College in Haifa, Dr. Judy Kahn from Hebrew University in Jerusalem, Dr. Miada Argan from the Ben-Gurion University, and all other lecturers that we will see and hear their sessions during the day. I thank you, and may we all have an interesting day.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to welcome you here at the second gathering that the Maimonides Fund's Future Scientists Centre, together with the Ministry of Education, have convened on the topic of research and practice in gifted education. As we meet here this morning, our minds and our hearts are split between our present and daily activities and our ongoing grave concern for the 125 hostages, men, women and children who are still being held in captivity in Gaza. As well, we send our strength and our support to the soldiers in harm's way, our family and our friends whose very lives are on the line, so as to allow us to continue living and doing our important work, including that for which we've convened here this morning. In that context, I'm very pleased that we're here to discuss research and practice in gifted education and the critical connection between the two. There's no doubt that one of the most important reminders we've had over the last 8 months is that Israel's future success will continue to rely largely on the development of our human capital, and in particular, those that will bring about scientific and technological breakthroughs that will enable the country to meet its critical challenges in the decades to come. At the same time, Israel needs to continue being an outward-looking and integrated country and society, which as we speak is taking blows in parliaments and international fora and campuses around the world. In our field of fostering and developing talent, we need to be unrelenting in providing our students with both the educational opportunities that will allow them to thrive, as well as the environmental supports, soft skills and communication abilities that will assist them to reach professional success, to integrate in the global stage, and in particular, to open doors and to keep them open, even in the most challenging of environments. With that in mind, there's no more appropriate expert to open our conference than Dr. Professor רינה Sbotnik, who has been at the forefront of the field of gifted education for decades. רינה serves as Research Associate at the Academic Talent Development Program in the Graduate School of Education at the University of California, Berkeley. From 2001 until June 2023, she was Senior Director of the Center for Psychology in Schools and Education at the American Psychological Association. Under her leadership, one of the centre's missions was to generate public awareness, advocacy, clinical applications, and cutting-edge research ideas that enhance the achievement and performance of children and adolescents with gifts and talents in all domains. She is co-author with Paula Olszewski-Kubilius and Frank Worrell of the Mega Model, and co-editor with the same team of the Psychology of High Performance, Developing Human Potential into Domain-Specific Talent. It's an extreme privilege to host רינה as our guest in Israel this week, to receive her unique insights into the trajectory of gifted education, and to have her with us this morning to hear firsthand about her extensive work. So without any further ado, I welcome Dr. I don't know if it's going to be doctor or professor today, I think it's doctor. Professor or Dr. רינה Sibotnik to the stage.
Good morning. I'm so happy to be here. And I wanted to say that a few months ago I received an email from Ellie Freed inviting me to this event and to spend some time with the staff and other affiliates of the Future Science Center. And I looked at the website and I went, my goodness, this is everything I would have recommended in terms of options for young people. And what am I going to talk about? And this was reinforced yesterday when my husband and I arrived at the airport. The driver told us that his aspiration for his children in East Jerusalem was to be able to get into the Alpha program. It brought chills up my back. So thinking about what I could contribute, I wanted to talk more about many things that I'm interested in, and that has to do with the psychology of high performance and how it might enhance the wonderful programs that you have available here. Now, this work is based on studies that my team and I have conducted. One was a longitudinal study of students who were participated in a research competition at age 17, and we followed them till age 35. Another study of 25 specialized science high schools in the US, and I apologize to all of you that my work is very US centered, but I hope after this week that will change. And then I spent 3 years observing in music conservatories. And you might say, well, why is that relevant here? And I have to tell you that the performance areas in music and in sport have so much to teach us in terms of mental skills and staying on top of distractions and being able to perform highly under stressful conditions, which our kids do, right? So I will be talking about that a little bit. And then more recently, we conducted a study of insider knowledge, that is knowledge that is explicit to some, but not all people, and how that is very important in talent development, particularly for those children we want to bring in who are currently not necessarily interested or even know about what we do. All right, let me do this. So I'm going to try to get through these main points. I'm going to differentiate teaching, coaching, and mentoring. And you'll notice I'm not saying mentor, teacher, and coach, because very often these roles can flow into one another, but they are separate roles that are important to talent development. The different fields have different trajectories. So at different ages, people can be at a certain level of expertise in one field and just beginning in another. And that makes life a little bit more complicated. Each type of mentoring can fit with different stages of talent development. So these are just my primers for you. And I want to talk with you about mentoring at the most advanced stages, where it's particularly important to promote psychosocial skills, creativity, strategic thinking, purpose, and insider knowledge. So if we look at mentoring, it's a very broad responsibility. So a teacher has great knowledge to offer. A mentor has additional perspectives on the domain beyond the school curriculum. However, teachers can learn to be mentors to a certain degree, and they will need to, because there can be a shortage of mentors when we need them. So for example, a teacher of science who knows about where the best out-of-school programs are located and who to contact. Someone who can tell students, I would go to this university, or I would explore this fellowship, or I would explore this internship of some kind, is serving as a mentor beyond what the expectation would be for a teacher. And most importantly, it's really not fair to some degree for talent development in STEM or any field to be exclusively in school. I mean, schools have a huge responsibility for all students. And so in reality, science talent has to be developed also outside of school. And teachers need to know what those programs are and which students might benefit from them. So again, a mentor will emphasize broader advice and wisdom, and a coach, and once again, it could be a mentor or a teacher, or it could be a professional coach, focuses on changing behavior that the person wants to change, or the mentor says, you better change. So for example, presenting. It's a skill. Some people are good at it right away. You have some kids that you know or you may have at home who love being on the stage. You have to pull them up. But most people are terrified to get up and speak. And so you do that with practice. And coaches would focus on the day-to-day practice agenda. Some interesting work was conducted by a Professor Jacoby that talked about, identified, and I found this helpful, 4 things that mentors can do for people. One is to serve as a role model. The goal being people in the audience saying, I want to be like you. An emotional supporter or a cheerleader. An intellectual sparring partner. How wonderful to have someone take your ideas seriously and challenge you. And a provider of professional contacts and insider knowledge. Now, it's important to say not every person, mentee, wants all of these things. They mostly will want professional contacts and insider knowledge and to talk with you about their ideas. Some of them don't need you as a role model and don't need your support as a cheerleader. Others will need it a lot. And at the same time, some mentors are not comfortable serving as a role model of their life and their work, or being an emotional supporter. So mentors will take any number of combinations and permutations of these 4 roles. But I think it's helpful to have this here and then think about when you're engaging mentors or deciding to be a mentor or working with a mentee, which of these do they need and which mentor can provide that. To make things slightly more complicated, but this is very logical, there are 3 levels of mentors. One can be very impersonal. It can be a YouTube video of someone that engages interests of young people or even adults. It can be a TED Talk where you go, oh my God, I never thought of that. That's really interesting, I want to know more. A second level is matchmaking, where you take students, you take mentors, and you try to match them up with maybe these four roles that I just talked about, the role modeling, sparring, etc. But at the highest level, mentors pick the person they want to work with. So if those of you who went through the getting a doctoral degree, you get picked by the doctoral advisor. If you're working in a scientific lab, very often you're handpicked. If you're a musician, same thing. So that's a whole complicated thing as well, because somebody who picks you, in the back of his or her mind, they're thinking, this is my protege, right? And that can get complicated after a while if you want to break away. So, but I wanted you to think about these three levels, because when organizing a program, we need to have these in mind. So I want to give you a little of the background that has inspired me in my work and the work of my colleagues. And I do want to distinguish here that maybe it's just in the US, but I would bet you can resonate to this as well. The giftedness world has a component that focuses on who you are. So this is a gifted person. Very often it's used as an IQ test to determine it. And then there's the focus of talent development, which is focused on being gifted in something. So this work is more focused on being gifted in math or science or music or sport or whatever, okay? Because there's a whole other rich literature on general giftedness. So this book is an oldie but goodie. It was written, it's called Developing Talent in Young People. It was written by Benjamin Bloom. Those of you who are teachers know the Bloom's hierarchy. But he also did other things. And this work was really interesting because what it did was take the top people in 6 fields of 3 domains, so in sport, arts, and academics, and sought to understand their development and whether there was any commonalities across them. And what he found was that in all cases, they had teachers who kind of evolved into mentors that followed this path. The first teacher helped them to fall in love. Now, this could be a parent as well. If you're lucky enough to have abilities and interests in the same field as your parents, wow, right? That's a great thing. It's chance that it happens. But you could also fall in love from an experience that you have, or a teacher at school, or a family member, or somebody in your community. And I will throw in here that in our study of specialized science high schools, we found that 60% of the students had a parent who was in science. So it wasn't surprising, but it was also disturbing in a way, because we're hoping to enlist more people. And these people were not necessarily research scientists. They could be a nurse, electrician, just people who are comfortable with mathematics and science and conveyed that at home. After a while, you might be in love, but you want to kind of advance. So the next kind of teacher would provide you with the skills, the knowledge, and the values. what is it like to think of yourself as a novice mathematician? You know, what are the values of the mathematics field or of being a scientist or being a musician? And then for the most committed and the most able, you have a mentor or a teacher who helps you find your special niche and voice, your original contribution. I think that's an awfully nice way to frame our jobs. Another interesting and helpful piece of work was conducted by Robert Sternberg that laid out the path of expertise from ability to expertise, and that there were transitions in between that required opportunities and commitment on the part of the talented individual. And the woman on the right is Linda Jarvin, who's currently president of the College of Art in Paris, worked with Sternberg and with I on this music study, where we found that over time, lessons shifted from teaching to addressing psychosocial concerns, providing professional advice, and helping the students to develop a unique voice. So we added this last part of the process here, artistry, scholarly creativity, because a musician, according to our work, didn't want to end up being a musician. They wanted to be called an artist. That was the highest compliment to a musician, is to be called an artist. We also found in the process some interesting changes over time. And if we have time, I can talk about this more. But I want to make sure to focus more on the STEM. So students come in psychosocially. Teachers this was at the Juilliard School particularly, were looking for teachability. What does that mean? It means that some kids come in and have gotten so many good strokes for being fantastic performers, they have no interest in learning anything. And so the teacher said, this is not a good investment of my time, so I want to find people who are teachable, who are hungry to learn. But over time, they want kids, as they called it, to bite back, to be able to say, I have a voice, I have a technique that I want to use that's mine. And then finally, I'll switch back and forth to this. This is my two colleagues that I work with the most, Frank Worrell and Paula Olszewski-Kubilius. And we did a massive survey of the literature in psychology related to creativity, eminence, genius, giftedness, etc., talent development, and came up with various principles. So I mentioned before that different talent domains have different trajectories. And we mapped out, you can see it in music, that certain instruments start early and voice starts later because of your development of your vocal cords and your lungs. And the same with athletics. And in the academic world, you can see talent in math very early. So somebody in middle school could be highly evolved in mathematics, but in many other fields, like my own psychology, you might not even know what it is, right? So you'd just be beginning. And here's an example. In medicine, it's a long process. First, getting into medical school, then taking the exams that you have to take after certain periods of time. Then once you finish medical school, you do the internship, the residency, then you have to do board exams. So compare that with software engineering, where you really don't have to go to university if you have a great idea as a teenager. So I'm sure that over time, more and more obstacles will be put in the way for, just to make the field a little bit more professional. But different fields have different trajectories, and a high school student or early university student might be much more advanced in software engineering than they would be in medicine, okay? So opportunities must be taken. We might offer opportunities, but we've had heartbreaks where people don't take them. Why is that? Sometimes they're just not interested. I've worked with mathematically talented students who are just good at it, but they're not really interested in, they don't spend their time solving problems. Whereas others will make up math problems and puzzles for themselves. There's a lot of pressure from parents to perhaps pursue engineering or medicine and not more academic approaches to STEM. Some don't want to specialize yet. Too many don't have the strategies or the insider knowledge to meet goals, and I'll talk about that more later, but so many of them are afraid they will fail. They've just been patted on the head and rewarded, and now if they go a little too far, they may fail. So I wanted, again, to show how in conservatories, this is dealt with explicitly. So they take a course taught by a sports psychologist where the focus is how to perform optimally at recitals, auditions, and competitions. Wouldn't this other child here in front of a book benefit from this kind of support as well? I know I would have, to learn how to deal with performance anxiety, distractions, etc. So what can we do as teachers, parents, mentors, etc., that are non-therapeutic? And if these don't help, then of course you turn to your professional colleagues to help. When I was a research coordinator at a laboratory school for gifted students, we brought in 200 students from around New York City who'd been the top student at their middle school. They came in and they looked around. Some of them said, "At last, I'm with my peers." But most of them said, "You made a mistake." No one ever said to them, everyone has that experience, that social comparison theory. Everyone does that at some point in their lives. So normalize it. Tell them, some of you are feeling like this, it's okay, we think you should be here. Because otherwise, they ruminate over this for a year and waste a lot of time. Being explicit also about expectations and study skills where they never had to study before, telling them what's available. Performance anxiety and anticipation of demonstrations. I've suffered from that myself and had somebody help me prepare presentations and practice. And procrastination on long projects. For example, my dissertation was torture. 5 chapters, working on your own, pretty much. So I was living in Seattle at the time at the University of Washington and had this wonderful store called Nordstrom. that was famous for their shoes. And as a graduate student, I had two pairs of shoes. But I promised myself, for each chapter that was accepted, I would buy myself a pair of Nordstrom shoes. And it was so reinforcing and wonderful, and it really worked. I still have those shoes. So I'm going to watch. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about some of the mental skills training that we and coaches can share with young people, including this list here. So, getting used to trash talk is very important for athletes when they're not in their home area. People are yelling things at them, and they're supposed to get distracted from that. Playing in a nightclub. Can you imagine working so hard as a musician, playing in a nightclub, and everyone's talking and drinking and ignoring you? But our kids take tests where people are clicking their pens, you know, their legs are bouncing up and down, etc. These are all very big distractions, but you can train yourself to not be distracted. Some of it you do by exposing yourself over and over to simulations of these kinds of situations until you can get over it. The point is, these are teachable skills. Those of you who are familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, the whole idea is to say, what's the likelihood that what you're thinking is real or meaningful? So you don't want people to ruminate. We all ruminate. And I was talking about this with some colleagues in Germany where we just came from, catastrophizing. And this is what happens with many of us when we dream. So our friend Heidrun she is now a professor doctor, as they say in Germany. She's a chair over like 5,000 students, etc. But she constantly dreams about a math test that if she hadn't passed it, she wouldn't have gotten into her graduate program and the whole ball of that. The graduate program, the habilitation, her job, etc., all because of this math test that she dreamt she had failed. And I think we've all had dreams like that. But that's catastrophizing. And so just talking about, not as a therapist, but talking about how likely is it, or what's the worst thing that could happen from what you're saying. Making leaps of logic, also assuming if you're at one of these parties where it's important to network and your friend doesn't talk to you because they have somebody in mind across the room that they want to contact because it's their only opportunity to do so, you might feel bad, but understand why they're doing it. Or assuming that someone's ignoring your instructions when you didn't really give very good instructions. So all of these things are great conversations to have with students when they're saying illogical things. But what they're doing is normal. Wonderful studies were done by someone named Yuri Treisman, who's a mathematician and math educator. But when he was a doctoral student at Berkeley, he took anthropology classes, and they gave him an exercise to solve a problem that the engineering school had, that their students were not doing well in calculus, and you needed to have calculus in order to move ahead. So he was looking at and followed several students, groups of students who were taking calculus. And there were students, the most successful students were Asian American students. And so he followed them and found out that they would have dinner together at a cheap restaurant, as is normal for grad students, and they would go over the study problems. So they would have heard if they all agreed, if they didn't agree, what was the difference, who, you know, have that person explain. Whereas other students did it by themselves, and they just never knew whether they had the right answer or they had thought about it properly. So he said it's really not a good idea when we have classes to put people in groups and tell them to solve a problem unless they've had a chance to do it first by themselves. Because what happens when you put people in groups is that somebody's got an idea and you lose, you lose the contributions of other people. So there's a whole literature, too, on capitalizing on group work. Strategic risk-taking. When do people get a chance to talk about this? When is it a smart idea to bring up a radical idea? There are strategic ways to do that. And you have to take into account the consequences. If I bring this up now, what are the consequences? Who will benefit? Who will be hurt? I'll just give you an example. In our local park, we have a problem where we have hundreds of signs everywhere. Dogs must be on leashes. Only 30% of the people with dogs in the park have them on leashes. So we did a brainstorming session about ways to address this problem and came up with some behavioral solutions that were moderately effective. So everyone said, good, you know, we did our best. The second order consequence, however, was that those people with dogs voted against money for the park. And then the third order consequence was that staff had to be let go or else were put onto another project. So see what I'm getting at is you solve a problem, but if you don't look forward, it may undermine what you've done. So just some other thoughts. I don't have answer to this, but some, if you don't act, are you still taking a risk? Can you live knowing you could have been a contender? In other words, I should have tried to push through my idea. Will people pull through for you if you take the risk? And what if people you care about resent you for your decision? This is, I think, really important to talk about with kids when they're coming up with creative ideas. Okay, now let's talk about social skills that mentors can share. Mentors can share how you acquire mentors and supporters. If you're a jerk, nobody wants to help you. I mean, somebody might want to help you. But if you're gracious, you thank people, you pay attention to people's needs, you will get mentors and supporters. And that means promoting yourself tastefully. That's a judgment question, right? But it's important to share that as well. How to be a dependable teammate, be prepared, be expert, be respectful, being a good listener and communicator. These are all things you'd hope parents would share with their kids, but sometimes they need reinforcement. There's a whole science of persuasion in the marketing departments. This is psychology also. There are very effective ways to get people to take their medicine. So it's not just buying more sneakers, how to take your medicine, how to recycle, etc. And dealing with envy and competition. You may your whole life be told it's great to be creative, but then when you're a professional and you do something that goes against the status quo, you may not be rewarded. So again, it's a good idea to let kids know this could happen, not to be surprised, it's human reactions. All right, I just want to, this is to me, even though it's old, the best way to assess a creative product, and I'm just bringing it up because very often when we talk about creativity, we say it's unusualness or originality and appropriateness. But with the kids that we're talking about here, we really want them to come up with ideas that change other people's thinking. And that they have summary power, that they're elegant. And on top of that, we want them to find purpose. Now, I say that because this was a really interesting study that just came out by Marianne Heng at Nanyang Technical University in Singapore. And she worked with an Israeli partner, Ina Blau, at Open University. And they focused on studies that worked with high-performing students in Singapore and in Israel and asked them about life satisfaction. They were satisfied with their schooling, their experiences, but in terms of life satisfaction, there were many of them that didn't feel they had a sense of purpose. So that would be the next challenge. And I would draw your attention to a wonderful theorist in the US, Abe Tannenbaum, who passed away. I'm looking at Rachel Zorman, she studied with him. And he talked about giftedness in children is about potential, but in adults, the idea is to develop activities that enhance the moral, physical, emotional, social, intellectual, or aesthetic life of humanity. That's purpose. So once you have a creative idea, you have to consider the consequences, you have to persuade others, you have to prepare yourself for rejection and for shaking up the status quo. So not everyone's going to be thrilled when you come up with a new and better idea. Let me talk now about insider knowledge. It's important information about content, behavior, skills, and relationships that are not made explicit, except for some. So I'll give you a couple of examples. When I was a teacher, before I did my doctoral work, I was a public school teacher of middle school age students in the Seattle public schools. On the first day, one of the experienced teachers came up to me and said, "Let me give you some advice." I said, "Great." She said, "Who do you think is the most important person in the building?" I was, you know it, those of you who are teachers, I thought the principal, okay. She said, "No, it's the secretary for the principal and the janitor." And I went, okay, I would respect them. I'm a well-brought-up child. I would have, been nice. But they said, being nice with these people and respecting them will make the difference between a life of hell and a wonderful teaching experience. Well, nobody teaches you that in your teacher preparation program, right? That's insider knowledge. And it was wonderful advice. And those people were wonderful. Another example, is that in California, there's a whole debate about when to teach algebra to students. And parents and mathematicians and the professional people were all pushing to have algebra at least in the 8th grade, the very lowest, highest at the 8th grade, for those students who were ready and available. And what they knew was that 60% of the majors in university required a higher level mathematics class to move on. And if you take it in university, it's taught by usually a professor who really doesn't want to be there, to 500 students, and it's not the best learning experience. Whereas, if you take it as a high school student with a teacher in a high school, you will get a much more caring environment with 25 people in the class. So even if you don't do that well, that experience will allow you to take the calculus class in university and have a head start. That's insider knowledge. When I first started my career, and I was in between mentors, I submitted an article about a project I'd spent years on, and I got revise and resubmit, which I immediately assumed meant rejection, and I never submitted it. And, that was really dumb, but I didn't have someone tell me, no, they really mean it. So, and I didn't learn that till I went to an editorial panel with editors from different journals who said, most of our articles are sent out with resubmit, revise and resubmit. It's usually the first order of business. So again, this was insider knowledge I missed out on. Insider knowledge is action-oriented, practical, and gained from experience. It's a very important part of talent development, and we can catalog it and share it, make it explicit. The model is the performance domains where they do a better job of sharing this kind of information. So I conducted a study with Paula and Frank on a convenience sample because it was just opening up. There's really very little written on this topic, with 14 highly successful STEM professional. We have M for medical sciences, ages 40s to the 70s. Our participants were the following. And I want to draw your attention that the 4 entrepreneurs, it's missing one there, but anyway, there are 4 entrepreneurs, it was defense, were the youngest. This is kind of what's happening in many universities where students are not necessarily pursuing academic jobs. Here is the protocol. It's in small letters, but if anybody's interested in these questions and wants to do something like this themselves, I'd be happy to share them. So basically, we're asking them, what are your sources for insider knowledge? What was the nature of that advice? And can you think of examples of mistakes you made, how you fix them? What advice would you give, etc.? So let me give you a brief summary of what we found. In the pre-collegiate area, early outside of school programs was really important so kids could find peers who were interested in what they were interested in and could share social experiences with them. This should be obvious because you have these things here, but it is super important. Participation in competitions can help with college applications, at least in the States, but can also discourage further pursuits of STEM. For some kids, they really had miserable experiences with them. But for the most part, they're wonderful for motivating students to learn a lot of STEM material. This one was particularly interesting to me, get involved with research early. And that was for two reasons. One, as indicated here, it helps to get a sense of what is real science, and is this the life I want? And then I wrote Westinghouse here as a reminder, because in the longitudinal study that we conducted, we saw that students who, it was a research competition that was funded by the Westinghouse company. And we hypothesized that students who came up with their own research question were going to be, over the long term, more successful as scientists than those who went to a research lab and were given a piece of a laboratory's work. But we were wrong, because the people who went to work in a laboratory got all that other mentoring that helped them make better decisions and to learn to be socialized into science. And at that point in their life, that was the best thing that could happen. And the others kind of were isolated and washed out, which is sad, but that's insider knowledge. At the undergraduate, there was a poor match of interests with institutions. So people had an idea, I want to go to Harvard, Stanford, whatever it is, even if there was no one there studying what you were interested in or that cared about what you were interested in. In contrast with music students who will go to different master classes that teachers give, and they care less about going to a Juilliard and will go to another institution that's excellent but not as well known, but that teacher is there who they had a great experience with. A poor transition from school math and science, high school math, to real math and science, which some of our people said was one downside about Olympiads, was that they were exciting and they were fun and you learned a lot, but you dealt with problems that you solved in 3 hours that had an answer. And you need also to have the experience of not having an answer for 10 years. And girls were very pleasantly surprised by the social life of being in a lab, where their stereotype was of this isolated scientist. And the poor transition from success as a student to dealing with failure in the lab, that the expectation is that you fail regularly in a laboratory. Graduate school, one very sad person went for rigor. He heard that this one professor was very demanding. In fact, this professor was mean. And so people just conflate rigor and meanness, and he suffered a lot. It was unnecessary. So very carefully select your advisor. Looking at the outcomes of previous graduates, and are they doing things that seem to be what you want to do. Again, I hope this isn't like this here, but in the US it's very hard to combine two domains. So if you want to do physics and mathematics, which is very common, many places will force you to major in both of them rather than have a tailored program for people who want to do mathematical physics or physical mathematics. Making sure grad students give talks and get feedback so you get yourself known and also get feedback. Graduate students recommended organizing seminars to collect insider knowledge from people you admire. And finally, and I thought this was really interesting, is how do you figure out what your audience is interested in? How can you get out, how can you address their interests so they'll come along with you? One of the, I'm sorry this is small, but it's just the concept that I'm trying to tell you. One of the people who's a theoretical chemist did a great job by organizing a website. And I would encourage those of you who are in the position to do so to make a website of insider knowledge for people thinking of applying to your area. Okay. So in terms of careers, see what the outcomes of your grad program go into. This was a very important problem for professors, how to get help managing doctoral students and postdocs and funding and budgets, et cetera, when you're supposed to be out there doing research, and that's what you get tenure for, but then you have all these other important responsibilities. Show students how nice your job is, because nobody's going to go into academia in the future if they see everyone pulling their hair out. I'm going to move more quickly here. Everyone recognizes the importance of these psychosocial skills, but not how they should be delivered. So I pose these questions to you because I don't have answers. What if insider knowledge that is given to you or to anyone is wrong or out of date? So this is just an ongoing field and an ongoing collection of information. What if it goes against a person's personal or cultural values? And how should it be collected and distributed? And I really want to urge you, I hope from now on, when you hear something that sounds like insider knowledge, you write it down and kind of keep a list that you can share. I also would like to encourage you to make a chart for yourself. This is an example of a filled out chart. The first column is the stages of development from abilities to competencies, competencies to expertise, and expertise and beyond. The next column is which of the roles of mentors should be involved. These are not the answers. It's just one that I filled out. What category of mentor? Should it be just a YouTube, or should it be one that's matching? What psychosocial skills should be taught at each stage, and what insider knowledge? And again, insider knowledge is particularly important for underserved groups. Summarizing is good. Okay, so mentoring, teaching, and coaching talented youth can be organized developmentally, and insider knowledge is of special significance. We really want kids to be creative and make contributions to their domains. They need to think about the consequences. They need to be prepared to push back against creative ideas, and they need to learn to be strategically courageous. Thank you.
We have a few minutes for questions.
Thank you for the interesting talk. I wanted to ask about two topics that related more to the first half of the lecture. One is regarding reasons why people, or actually young students, don't choose to continue with something. You said they're not interested, and there are other options. But there is another option where people perceive themselves different from what you see as an educator. And that's because of the house they came. They think, oh, this is not the job for me. The parents don't think that's the job for them. They think it's not socially the right thing they would want. That's one question. How do you address that? And the second is, when you gather people together, it's an amazing experience, of course. They find their peers, but then they discover that some may be better than they at the topic in which they are the best and have always been the best. So if somebody's really good at math, what happens when he encounters another person who's actually much brighter than him or her? And then there's a whole issue when you're teaching that class or when you are dealing with that class, how to keep them still motivated, although they discover that there are other people who are maybe even more talented.
Well, we could do a...
It's working. It's working.
Huh?
זה עובד.
Hello. Okay, you asked two great questions. Let me address the second one
זה
first.
עובד. צריכה לדבר.
This is reality.
זה עובד. שני עובד.
There are two parts. One is, are you correct that in fact you're not as bright as the other person? But that is a reality. And what happens, for example, in music schools or art schools, okay, is that they've developed alternative careers, such as being an accompanist or focusing not on solo performance, etc. So, I mean, there are efforts like that. I know from these conversations that many people would go to be a math major and think, particularly in math, you have to be brilliant. And if you're not brilliant, maybe I should be a physicist or a chemist. Seriously, you know, which is crazy, but so many of them started off as math people and did feel like they had the wherewithal or the energy or the interest. I mean, the questions weren't as interesting to them as physics questions or chemistry questions. But we do have to address that. And we do have to talk about alternative careers that they can do with the amazing abilities they have. So I think you brought up something really important. And the other, I think that's where those first level role models, finding kids who are from the same backgrounds or finding adults who are from the same background who are doing outrageously wonderful things is very helpful to start changing that self-reflection also, but it's very important and difficult. Maybe a couple other ones.
Thank you. I would like to ask about the difference. If during your work, did you notice the difference between boys and girls all over the stages that you would just show us?
Okay. Yes, there are differences that are closing happily. One, this is weird, so just bear with me. One was a study, I didn't do this myself, but there was a study done at the University of Colorado. At the University of Colorado, this was disturbing, where they looked at girls in STEM, young women in STEM, and said when somebody was not doing well, their friends rallied around them. But when they stood out doing well, their friends weren't there for them. I don't know if that resonates, but that was sad. And on the other hand, boys, if you were not doing well, they wanted nothing to do with you. And if you were doing well, you were attracted people like flies. Now, neither of those are healthy, right? So again, it was a great opportunity to bring it up. I would say they didn't do that, they just collected that information. But the fact that it resonates with so many people, even though it's sad, particularly about the girls, to read about, to hear that, we can talk about it with girls and say, does this happen with you? If so, imagine, not being happy for your friend who's accomplished something here, So that was one, and the other is that careers. It's still very difficult for girls to match the timing of having a family with the career trajectory in many fields. So that's still something, a work in progress. Yes.
Rina, you have conducted with Frank and Paula a study, and you investigated the characteristics of athletes and musicians, and what are the insights for us teachers here relating to developing giftedness or talent?
Thank you. Really, it's the psychosocial skills. I mean, it's a different gift. They're equally gifted to the kids we're working with, just in another domain. And mostly what we got out of it was how you really need to control your mind to perform better. And I don't think we do much of that in the best way, not to be manipulated, and that we can learn from it. I really advise you, if you have a coach or a sports psychologist friend or a person on your faculty, to talk with them and get some ideas and talk about it with the kids too, because it's not threatening, it's not their field, but they may pick up some good stuff from it. So really that's what we pulled, was we talked with sports psychologists, not so much the athletes. We did talk to musicians, but also to music psychologists. I think we lose something if we don't look at talent in other areas and think about what we could bring in to our work. Plus, it's fun. We have two more in the back. And if anyone else has a contribution to my answer, if you want to help me, please do.
Hi. Is there any commonality between these top talented students and their social skills?
I have a question about the mentors you mentioned. What about students that reach out for a mentor, that seek out a mentor that they specifically want to follow and learn from?
Is there any reason why you wouldn't want them to?
Is there, it's like a different maybe character of mentoring from the three you mentioned? Maybe because it's like mentoring in adulthood more so, like a student that he's no longer a student, he's seeking his own path maybe. I guess it's a new skill to learn, how to find your mentors later in life.
Well, I would encourage you to think about whether it would be useful for the students that you work with to have mentors earlier in life. And maybe it would be helpful to them, particularly let's say with social skills, to talk about how important it is, again, to find mentors, make yourself an attractive person. Sought more and more creative work now is done in teams, right? Social skills play even more of an important role there. How you get along with others, how you're dependable, etc. And you know, some people are born more socially adept, but I would say you have to learn how to do it.
During the coffee break. So if anyone else have question for Rina, you can catch her. Thank you very much. אנחנו נצא להפסקה של כחצי שעה ונחזור לכאן בשעה 12 לחדר הזה לסשן השני.